morning, good evening, depending on the part of the world you're in today or tomorrow. And I look forward to, as the invitation indicated, it's going to be fast-paced. We get into quite a bit of detail here on what you can do to push your scorecard and strategy into high gear. As Candace mentioned, I'm the Director of Research and Technology. I've worked a lot of years with the IBM Corporation doing hardware, software consulting, as well as a lot of scorecarding inside of IBM. I started out my work-life career in a senior executive at the Milwaukee School of Engineering, where I attended the mechanical engineering program. And I also went to an executive in residence, I was an executive in residence at the Plug and Play Tech. If anybody that's on a phone, they'll have to mute. There'll be a little blank maybe for a second. That's good. Hold on. Any phone callers, please go on mute. We'll come right back in a second. There we go. I know, somebody's on a phone. Yeah, we got it. All right, hold on here a second. It's going to take a couple seconds for GoToWebinar to reset this coloring. Well, technical difficulty here. All right, so let's get back to this bio. I spent some time with some technology startups as an executive in residence at the Plug and Play Technology Incubator in Sunnyvale, California. I've spent a large amount of my time between the IBM Corporation and the Balanced Scorecard Institute in consulting and working in a technical capacity around the world. And a constant life learner. As you can see, I'm a doctoral candidate in the next year or so at the University of Phoenix. My email address there, and you'll be getting a copy of this presentation as we go through. Just a reminder, please use the questions panel on your navigation window that's part of GoToWebinar. I'll try to respond to all the questions submitted within the time of the webinar, but most webinars we can't, there's such a flood of questions that we can't get through all of them. But what I would ask you to do is to copy down that email or that link below, balancedscorecard.org/contact. And in there, they'll fill in your email address and your name, and there's a box for a message or a window for a message that you can fill in, and you can write any questions in there. I'll give you a heads up looking ahead. There's a number of exhibits in this presentation that were too large for the PowerPoint format, so I've offered to send you those. They're called plans, and you can get those plans by using this contact URL. And again, as Candace said, we're making a recording of this presentation. I don't think I'm online. Hold on a second. Let me double check that. Yep, okay. Sorry, folks. Got a little worried when that reset the screen here. First order of business is we want to alert you that we're having a users conference on March 30th to April 2nd in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. The registration information is at the bottom. I would like to say one of the things that I think that you could benefit from by attending this conference is everything we're doing here for this hour and a half for this webinar is kind of like coming down close to the surface or getting into the details of some of the suggestions that we have. But this conference is going to build from this and get into deeper aspects. There's a great series of start-off activities on the pre-conference day, and then there's quite a few 2 days of full presentations by strategists, technologists, and the post-workshops on April 2nd are workshop activities, and in fact myself, I'm on one of the workshops with an advanced balanced scorecard problem-solving workshop. So some of the things that we're going to talk about today I'll probably have worked into that workshop as well. All right, so let's see. First is strategy formulation organizations or BSc practitioners' duty. It's actually a combination of both. It's responsibility. It starts at the CEO or the senior leadership level. They have to sponsor it. They have to communicate it. They have to set the bar in terms of the direction of the organization. And then the strategist is the person that you'll see later on that I've labeled the Strategic Management Office, or SMO. They execute on those plans for the leadership and executive. Let's see, we got another question. Strategy and idea and tactics are really finishing for the goal. So how do you formulate tactics? Well, a little later when we see some of these plans for running an evaluation period or setting up communications plans, you're going to see the top level headers called an action, and then there's an action item. And so the tactics become evident once the strategy has been designed and put in place. If you were to start to work on the tactics side or the operational side first without any kind of a roadmap from the strategy side, you would find yourself doing a lot of rework and probably plowing the same territory over and over again without a strategy in place. Good questions to start. So again, Users Conference, March 30th to April 2nd, Myrtle Beach. Hope we can see you there. Now, I got to set the groundwork here for everything that you're going to see, because it's based on the Balanced Scorecard Institute's 9-step process or methodology, or 9 steps of success. When we are called out to engage with clients to help them build a strategy from the corporate level for the enterprise level scorecard all the way down to the teams and individuals, we start with an assessment. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today, because that's one of the traps that a lot of organizations fall into. They do this assessment the first time to build their corporate scorecard, and it's like, we don't have to visit that again, do we? And it's like, well, you really do have to visit that again. You're always going to be developing strategy. Strategy is going to be the first pass, but you've got to go back and evaluate that. So we're going to talk a little bit about those particular traps. What about the objectives, or the strategic objectives that make up that strategy? You're going to have to constantly review those to make sure that they're solid and sound and they follow your assessment. You're going to create a strategy map that shows the cause and effect links, or the logic of the interaction of the objectives. You're going to constantly set and check and reset measures and targets as the scorecard rolls out. And you're going to create strategic initiatives or projects that are going to help support the successful conclusion of those strategic objectives. Technically, at the end of step 6, you can roll out your corporate scorecard, but the job's not done yet. You have to start monitoring and evaluating what's going on with those objectives, performance measures, and targets. Are they being achieved? And you do that through performance analysis or some type of automation. And we're going to take a look at a little sample later on today. Alignment is a big part of making sure that that corporate strategy, or that tier 1 scorecard at the highest level, gets filtered down to all levels of the organization. So I'll make a very bold statement here that some that may have scorecards in place already, others that are thinking about building scorecards, once you get your corporate scorecard done, your job is not done. It's just starting. in regards to alignment. You have to start cascading that scorecard down to the departments, and then eventually you have to cascade from those departments down to the teams and individuals within those departments. Once that's done, Tier 1 corporate scorecard, Tier 2 departmental scorecard, and Tier 3 for teams and individuals and their individual goals, now you have achieved alignment throughout the entire organization. And then, of course, step 9, you cannot get away from planning, and we're going to talk a little bit about it, the evaluation process that needs to be done. You're going to have to put an evaluation plan in place, and it's going to have to be dictated by the veracity of your scorecards and how often your environment is changing. So sometimes the evaluation periods will be monthly, sometimes they'll be quarterly, sometimes they'll be annually. The most important message is you have to do the evaluations. Let's level set with one other thing. When you ask 10 people what a balanced scorecard is, you will get 10 different answers. But a balanced scorecard fundamentally comes down to these 4 identifiers. It's a communications tool. Once you get the scorecard built and you get it illustrated, you can start communicating with clarity what the organization's vision and mission is to all employees throughout the organization. The other thing it does, as you heard from the prior slide, it aligns. If you cascade or communicate through your scorecards from Tier 1 or corporate down to departments, and then eventually down to the teams and individuals of those departments, you are now aligning the day-to-day work. It provides a framework that allows you to set up projects, budgets, products and services that you should be doing, and identifying the resources that will help solve those strategic objectives positively. And then, of course, you have to measure what's happening inside the scorecard with those strategic objectives. So it's a communications tool, it's an alignment tool, it's in a framework, and it sets up strategic performance measures. And the last level setting slide is this is a balanced scorecard. Oftentimes when I'm teaching class, somebody will sit in class and after about a couple hours they'll say, so what is a balanced scorecard? This is a balanced scorecard. It has strategic objectives in the left column. It has objective owners, it has commentary, it has performance measures, it has targets, and it has those strategic initiatives or projects. It's all about creating value to resolve that vision positively. You've got to tell who's responsible. You're going to hear me talk about objective owners a little later. You're going to hear me talk about projects or the initiatives. You've already heard me talk about cascading or alignment to these objectives, to the departments, and eventually to the personal employee objectives. So when you hear scorecard later on, that structure is the scorecard. And you have that interaction or those cause and effect links on the left column for that scorecard. Okay, alignment, teamwork with the vision, mission in mind. Absolutely. When you align your scorecards from Tier 1 down to Tier 2, the first thing is you're gonna see a little later on when we talk about alignment is the departments do not get to change the vision of the organization. They can change the mission of their department because each department's mission is typically different from the one next door to them. But the one thing that doesn't change is that vision. That vision stays aligned all the way down. How about some projects require feasibility studies, which requires time? Is BSC offers this solutions. I'd love to say that just having the balanced scorecard would be the ultimate brass ring of finding a way to do project speculation faster. But the fact of the matter is that column of strategic initiatives are strategic projects, and they require the standard steps of scoping, budgeting, what's the alternatives, what's the start time? What's the end time? So consequently, I'd like to say it offers the solutions, but what it does is it's going to put you in a structure. And I like to say you need to have project management 101 skills in order to handle those initiatives properly. All right, one more question before we move on. At this today's highly competitive scenario, if after the 9th step evaluation, perhaps revise the strategy or formulation of a new strategy is required. True. When strategy is changed, structure also will be changed. Possibly. So a wide, broad 10th step as follow-up action is required, isn't it? Not necessarily. When you go through the Step 9 evaluation, you'll see in just a moment, you're going to take a look at all the various strategic components of this current slide that's up here, of this scorecard. You're going to go through a revalidation process. Has some things changed in the micro environment, macro environment? Has things changed in regards to anything in our business processes? And the example I'm going to show you is a live example from one of my clients that said, look, we had some changes in the macro environment. We had to change some business processes, so consequently we have to relook at some of our objectives and potentially measures. So insightful question, but the 10th step is really the 9th step with the outcome from the 9th step. All right, so for this presentation, I set up some rules of the road because high gear, fast, back to car racing, which I used to do when I was a youngster. And I've set some rules of the road up here, and the green lights are the good things. These are tips and techniques. In fact, everything that you're going to see in just a minute in the 3 sections are all green lights. They should be in place, set the scorecard strategy in motion, keep it in motion in order to generate value for the customers of the organization. In other words, you have to do these. The second thing that's most important also is the communications program and alignment efforts across the entire organization. This gets into things like collaboration, teamwork, everyone pulling on the oars of the boat with the same strength. They understand where the navigation's going, where the vision's going, to make sure that everyone knows their required contribution to the organization's strategic success. How about the monitoring, the gauges? When you monitor or you performance analyze, you're looking at the implementation and execution of the scorecard and the strategy. It's just like the gauges in the instrument panel on your car. No one will drive very long without looking at what's going on with the instrument panel. It's the same thing with your scorecard. Here are the bad things. Here's the traps. If you don't do some of these things I've identified coming up, or you forget to do them, or as I've actually seen in some situations, they feel like we don't need to do those or they've ignored it, you are putting your scorecard success or your entire system at risk, because you're not following through on some very simplistic things in nature that people by fundamental nature just don't like to spend the time on, or they've taken the view that, oh, we haven't done that for 50 years we've been in business, we don't need to start doing it now. So these are traps that I've identified coming up that you can look at. So what are the shifts? What are the shifts to your scorecard system for high gear strategy execution? Well, I broke this into 3 parts. This first one presumes that you have a scorecard in place. In fact, this whole presentation presumes that you have a scorecard in place. And we're going to make the presumption that it's a Tier 1 corporate level scorecard. So what about scorecard tune-ups? Well, there's 3 parts to that. And these are really the ones that with a scorecard in place, you've really got to execute on. You got to determine what's the right evaluation period. Is it monthly, quarterly, or annually? What are you doing to reassess of M&M Environments? And this is not a reassessment of the candy M&Ms. This is macro environment and micro environment. And what are you doing about the communications programs? I will make this statement very clear now. You see communications programs up there twice. If there's one thing that most organizations, in regards to their strategy and their strategy implementation and their strategy awareness throughout the rank and file of the organization, do poorly, for the most part, is the communications. They think they can just send an email. They think they can do just one all-hands meeting. We'll see an exhibit later on that John Cotter says, when you think you've communicated enough, you've probably under-communicated by 10 times or 100 times what you should be doing in terms of communications. All right, next section, strategically align your organization. You're going to process, I'm going to show you the process to align the corporate scorecard across your entire organization. Corporate, Tier 1, departmental, Tier 2, teams and individuals, Tier 3. And then we're going to talk about the communications program for that. Because even though it's gotten out of the corporate office or the headquarters office, now it's down to the departments. What do the department managers have to do to foster the communications on strategically aligning your strategy? And finally, then, we're going to do a little monitoring and alignment across the organization. I'm going to show you a little bit about performance and initiative monitoring via some software. And also, we're going to talk about pulsing the organization, and I'm going to show you that via the software. And it's just a reference, because many times when you get through the entire system, all through 9 steps, and you've got the automation or the performance analysis running, you've got the alignment done, you set up your evaluation period, many times clients, colleagues that I work with, they think, well, I don't have to pulse the rank and file anymore. We do an annual employee survey. And I would say, well, that may be the case, but you need to pulse the rank and file in terms of what they understand the strategy to be. So consequently, we have to start thinking about the right type of sampling numbers that significantly can be used predictive. Well, I don't want to go after all 5,000 employees. What is the right confidence number? So can we do 30 and get a good sampling? Can we do 100? It all depends. So we're going to talk about pulsing a little bit. All right, let's start with scorecard tune-up. Here's that evaluation plan. First thing is you have to develop the plan. It's amazing to watch executive suites go through the entire amount of time and investment of resources that they do to create their corporate Tier 1 scorecard, and yet they don't want to get serious about what has to go into the evaluation plan. You have to determine the roles and responsibilities. I hope by this time, whoever was the Balanced Scorecard champion, whoever was the strategist that was assigned, did you create a strategy management office? You've got 1 or 2 people that are working that responsibility side. You have to determine the schedule and scope. What's the right schedule for your organization? Every organization is different. Some it might be quarterly. Some it has to be at least annually for every organization as a minimum. You have to go through and analyze exactly what happened with the results against planned results. Review the background assumptions. Oh, this is a very interesting statement, because those of you that have built scorecards and have them in place should be able to think back to all of the documentation that you collected during that initial build. And I hope, I know I advise my clients in this regard, I hope that you have that all archived somewhere, or you have it all captured in your performance software, or in our case, our Balanced Scorecard software, where it's designed to keep that documentation. What were all of those assumptions? You have to sit down and look at the performance results against the targets. What about the projects or the initiatives against the expectations? You know, there's a very interesting graphic that we use during training. It's a pyramid. Pyramid at the very top starts with mission, And as you go down that pyramid and it gets wider toward the bottom, the very last foundational element are initiatives. It happens to be the foundation of the pyramid. Did your initiative or project results come true based on expectations? And another statement that I'll make is that a lot of firms, when you ask them, are you guys good at finishing on time and within budget the projects that you spec out? You would be very surprised at how quiet it is in the room sometimes. You put your entire strategy in jeopardy if you don't finish the initiatives successfully. You've got to start. That's why I say this is Project Management 101. During this evaluation period, you make changes to the strategic elements and scorecard system. So you're going to revise or revisit your vision, missions, values, customer value prop. What about the strategic themes that run? They are the pillars. Those are the 3 or 4 themes or activities that you must do on a 24/7, 365 days a year in order for the business to be even successful, close to being successful. What about the objectives and the strategy map? Do you have to revise the performance measures? We're going to talk about objective owners. I already mentioned them. You got objective owners on all those strategic objectives. They are the ones that will make recommendations for performance measure and target changes because they've been the closest to this every year. And finally, what about some new strategic initiatives? Initiatives, by their very nature, when a project starts and ends, you should have another initiatives taking its place on the scorecard. By the way, that's another tip that I should have put in here, is that when you spec out your strategic initiatives and projects, you should always have some quick win projects in there so that you can draw attention to your scorecard and say, we're solving these strategic initiatives on a regular basis and clipping them off and moving them up. All right, let's take a couple of questions here. Can a vision statement have a timeline? Absolutely. I'm a very big fan of time-binding vision statements. Why? That's the whole purpose of the scorecard, is to resolve the vision. The employees have to know what they're working toward and when it might work and end. I'll use as an example. Back in the late 90s, Starbucks had a very simple vision statement, highly inspiring, highly quantitative, and highly time-bound. 2,000 stores by the year 2000. Now, some folks in class tell me, well, Joe, what happens when they blew by 2,000 stores, which they did prior to the year 2000? They have to rewrite their vision statement. We just got done saying during the evaluation period, you might revisit and revise your vision statement. So yes, I like time binding. There are a lot of vision statements that I call the never-ending vision statement. There's no time binding. I'm wondering how that works in terms of employee rank and file acceptance, that this is a real solid vision. That's a rhetorical question. All right, how about this one? In cascading, how about we align the strategic objectives to departments and assign measures to them, then we accumulate the performance in these sub-objectives to the upper level. Is it a good practice? Absolutely. You're going to do a drill down from the most highest level scorecard, because the objectives at that department were based on those objectives at the tier 1 level that the department strongly supported. They created strategic objectives that supported their own department, and they also created objectives that align directly to the tier 1, and you'll see an exhibit about that in just a second. Some organizations do not allow the BSC practitioner to touch with the mission and vision. How do you believe we can manage this? Interesting question. First of all, I'm very empathetic to your situation if that's the one that you're in, because the mission, I hope the mission statement really does describe exactly what their purpose is and for whose benefit. And the vision, and by the way, there are some pretty good rules about how long and how in-depth they can be, and they should be very short, so that I like to use the statement about walking into your office building and seeing the mission and vision statement on the wall behind the receptionist. And I don't know anything about your organization, but by the time I get to the 10th floor in the elevator, I can still remember the vision and the mission statement. So if you're being told hands off on the mission statement and vision statement, you're pretty much in that command and control environment. So first question is it going to be worth your time to continue doing the strategic scorecard at the tier 1 level? I think it will. And I think what will happen is, as you go through the process, you may come up with logical conclusions that say, maybe that vision's got to be revised slightly. Again, as I said earlier, I like time binding and I like quantitative, so we know when we've reached it. Not only by time, but we've got some measurable result in there. You talk about departments and teams, but what about strategic business units or business unit level? Okay, good question. Let me tell you about one client that I have. One client I have has a holding company. It really is just an office that runs their entire particular industry group. Same product line. That holding company has its own tier 1 scorecard. Now we go down, and I'll use your language, strategic business unit. Let's say each of the manufacturing locations is a strategic business unit. I like to also use the guideposts that these guys have at these strategic business levels, their own presidents, vice presidents, senior VPs, the whole, almost an autonomous structure. That could be your SBU, your strategic business unit. They might have a tier 1. I've seen other organizations that, while we think that the tier 1 card should be at the top level and everyone should cascade or align to that, the executives want to be there in control of their own destiny. So they'll create a tier 1 scorecard and then cascade down to the business units and support services from there. How long does, last question, how long does evaluation take? Very good question. Let's move to this slide. How long do you think it takes to do the introduction and purpose if you've got tier 1 executives and the key support departments in there? Review and evaluation. We got to look at the strategic foundations. Presentations by the objective owners. Remember, they got to tell us how those performance measures and targets are being met. They got to make any changes. I'll back up in a second to strategic management maturity model. Oh yeah, we got to look at the communications plan. That's under the presumption that you have a communications plan. And we got to have general discussions. I can tell you categorically that this particular agenda was an initial 2 days. They made some assignments and they had to come back for another couple days. But that presumes that there was a lot of research and homework that was being done to put this data and information together. So length of time, it's the length of time that is got to be properly apportioned so that everyone in the room understands what's going on with the scorecard at any point in time. And you can see this is the first trap I've identified. Many organizations will not spend the time to design out the evaluation plan or even conduct the meetings. They'll say, send all your documentations in, all of us will take a look at it, we'll make a couple of comments on emails, bing, bang, done, it's been reviewed. Not the right approach. Now, let me back up here. I put this slide in called the Strategic Management Maturity Model. It was developed by the Balanced Scorecard Institute. In fact, you can go to that URL, balancedscorecard.org, and in the search box, put in the search argument SMMM, and you can actually take this assessment yourself online or download the documentation. And you can do it inside your own organization. And every year, what I recommend to organizations and departments, by the way, once there's cascading or alignment undertaken, is that you conduct this and start collecting the data. So you can see how the entire process of strategic management and implementation is taking hold. And basically, you run a 1 to 5 scale. You can have 1.1s and 2.3s, wherever you say you want to do that. And it runs across these level 5, these continuums of ad hoc and static. Well, ad hoc and static is another name for command and control. They think about it, they tell you what the answer is, and that's what you do. We got reactive. Well, there's a little bit of command and control, but we'll take a look at some feedback and input. How about something structured and proactive? Well, the leaders model the desired behaviors and the values, but engage with direct reports only, not the entire population. And then how about manage and focus? Leadership empowers. You stop and think about it, when you align the scorecards, you're really passing down everyone in the organization to determine their own destiny. They know what they need to contribute to achieve that vision. And finally, everyone wants to be level 5. Leaders and employees are fully engaged in a continuous dialogue in a team-based culture. And by the way, you assess those 5 levels across those dimensions: leadership, culture and values, strategic thinking and planning, alignment, performance measurement, performance management, process improvement, and sustainability. And if you are just starting out building a scorecard, for those of you that built one and have had it in place for a while, you're going to know that as you execute on that scorecard, you're going to identify process improvement activities, and some of those are going to be driven by the projects or initiatives, but fundamentally they're driven by the strategic objectives that are in place. So I encourage you to go out and do this yourself. By the way, you can download the white paper that explains this, and I would advocate that over the course of your next series of evaluation periods, whatever it might be, hand it out and see how the score changes as you go through the alignment process. All right, we got some more questions here. Who should be involved in the revision in an organization? Good question. Well, Tier 1 is the corporate scorecard. So let's take a look at this slide that's up. Now this one's a little more detailed. It presumes you've already aligned through 3 tiers. Well, look at that Tier 1. If you haven't aligned to Tier 2 and 3, then just ignore 2, 3 for now. But look at Tier 1. This will answer your question. I think it was Martin. Initiate the annual strategy evaluation. Who does that? The CEO and the Strategy Management Office. Is that Strategy Management Office a team? Maybe. Is it one person? Most likely. But at least there's a focus on the strategy. Second thing you do is you act on any changes. That's that agenda I had earlier. But look at the inclusion now. The strategic objective owners are acting on that. And review the performance measures and initiatives and update if needed. Why? You're going to go through the assessment process. Same group. And finally, you're going to revise the communications plan, because now you just made some changes to your strategy. Everybody was comfortable for 12 months, let's presume, and now all of a sudden there's a slight course correction in the strategy. You have to communicate that. You can take a look at Tier 2. Now, Tier 2, I put a note in there that balancedscorecard.org/contact. There's 3 different instances in this presentation where I say you can request a full copy of the potential periodic evaluation plan and other plans coming up. Just fill that contact form out and say plans, and you'll get all 3 of them. Okay. Tier 3 is really down to the rank and file. But look at Tier 2. Tier 2's job doesn't really change from Tier 1, except it's at the department level. Tier 3 is where your managers, your department heads, are having a discussion with your teams and individuals about how their goals for the year may change because their goals at the department level changed as well. It's not that hard. I like to say at some point in time during this presentation, and I'll probably say it at least twice, 3 times, this is not rocket science. This is just heads down planning. It's communications. It's talking. It's looking at data, making changes to your strategy. And I don't care what kind of software you have, the software can't do that for you. You have to do it as the human involved in this process. Let's take a couple questions. Can you have a Tier 1 map without targets? No. Initiatives? No. Measures? No. GIZA? Got to have those. How do you differentiate between mission and vision? Mission is your purpose. That's why that pyramid I talked about earlier, everybody always asks us in class, Joe, you always say, look, we got to resolve the vision successfully with the strategic objectives and the map and all the other stuff. But you've got mission at the very top. You have mission first, because if you don't know what your purpose is in your business, how can you structure a vision to move the organization forward if they don't know what their purpose is? Vision is where you want to be 3 to 5 years down the road. I've actually had a lot of kickback from students recently in the technology sector say, hey, 3 to 5 years is a lifetime in technology. Should it be something more around 3? And the answer is yes, if you're a tech industry. Other industries, government, nonprofit, maybe not. How about future generations perspective? Actually, sustainability has to be incorporated. A separate perspective and balanced scorecard, isn't it? Okay, I'm going to presume that sustainability in this case means the green efforts. If you want to follow that up with a question that's, if you're talking about just scorecard sustainability, those things are really taken care of during the evaluation period. If it's just scorecard sustainability, scorecard worthiness, scorecard strength, scorecard designed properly to give you the right information for what's in your macro and micro environment, that's what your evaluation purpose is for. And Joe, will you discuss performance measurement and management with examples of how you suggest this? Unfortunately, Grant, I will not talk at any length about performance measures other than the fact to say that they're part of the scorecard. Measures and targets are part of the scorecard. You really have to dig into this heads down, very focused on performance measures, targets, and threshold setting. And we have our own course offering in that regard. It's called the PUMP program that sets up the details on performance measures, targets, and thresholds. All right, let's move on. Here's that M&M environment, macro environment. There isn't anyone right now on the face of the earth that is not having some effect by any of those elements in that macro environment domain. And they really do drive everything that you do then at your organizational level for the micro environment. Economic forces are fluctuating every day. Socio-cultural forces are always in movement regardless of where you are in the globe. Political, legal, and regulatory forces. Work with some power generation clients, and the first words out of their mouth are the regulatory problems. In the United States, they can't get the Environmental Protection Agency to tell them exactly what the regulations are in terms of their ability to do business and continue business. Technological forces. It's probably one of the big hitters right now, is that technology is just ramping up everywhere and just making it easier to do more with less. And your environmental forces. Micros. These are getting close to home now. You got your customers, you got your suppliers, you got your labor unions, you've got your competitors. All those, and you can probably fill in more in that domain. And finally, they're little tiny you, the organization, with all of these other domains pressing on it. If you don't do these 2 M&M assessments on an annual basis, I will guarantee you one of them will blindside you within the next 12-month period of your scorecard. You have to have some early warnings on it, so you have to do these assessments. Now, Here's another concept that we started introducing at the Balanced Scorecard Institute. It's a derivative off the Blue Ocean strategy principles. When we build scorecards for clients, or we don't build them, we help them, we facilitate them to build their own scorecards. In fact, the Institute's very emphatic about not being brought into an organization to say, okay, Balanced Scorecard Institute, build our scorecard for us. We don't do that. We facilitate the rank and file, the executives, the boards, to do their own scorecard. We just guide them with our methodology. But one of the things we started moving into that was this strategy profile. And we say, look, by the time you get done looking at all of the elements, let me go to this slide. Looking at your processes, your mission, your vision, values, everything down to strategy profile, you are starting to get enough of a view as to what your differentiators might be when you compare yourself as organization ABC to organization D, E, and F, who's your competitor maybe. So you can plot those. And look what I put in here on this slide, these market differentiators. In fact, I just went through this process for another client. I actually split the group up into two groups, and I had them build two strategy profiles. And then we affinity grouped them together. The amazing thing was, with 20 guys, 10 people on a team, they almost came up with the same differentiators. And if you look at these differentiators, when you look at function, timeliness, economics, and quality, those are the attributes of a customer value proposition. And then you add in there the image, how you want to be seen by your customer. And then what kind of a relationship do you want to enter into with your customer? And those differentiators are the basis for how do you compare to your competition. And in this case, the green circles say, too much white space. I have to do some investment there somehow to raise up whatever function one was defined as. Our competition's beating us badly. What do we need to do differently? We need to invest in timeliness. Maybe our supply chain management system stinks and we know it, and we just don't address it. Maybe that's a timeliness problem. And what about if you're an organization that has the world's worst relationship history, and you're just living day to day and you're not addressing it, but your competition's relationship is primo? You have to invest in what you're going to do differently in that regard. So very quickly you can start to see, coming out of this strategy profile, potential strategic objectives for your overall strategy for your organization, which, by the way, in this case is done for Tier 1, because this should set the tone and the initial card at the corporate level, which gets cascaded downward to Tier 2s and 3s. All right, let's see. You got any questions? You guys are good on questions. All right, new questions. Who should write the mission and vision? We always recommend that the mission and vision is written by the senior executive team for a Tier 1. We take them through a facilitated process to help them identify what they are. In fact, we actually have a template that we use in those engagements. Let's see. Why the card is limited to customers only? Why not consider the other stakeholders? If you mean, Hamza, if you mean the strategy profile, that strategy profile and that customer value proposition that is defined by these elements here, there was an exercise that was done right up here where you develop that strategy profile, you develop the customer value proposition, and part of that domain is stakeholders. It's really stakeholders and customers. Let's see, is it a good practice for SMOs to evaluate a department scorecard without the involvement? Absolutely not, Martin. The SMO is in there, and you're going to see in just a minute with the communications program, just so the SMO can be the, I call it the knowledge base or the knowledge stream back to the Tier 1 scorecard. But you got to let the department manager manage his own scorecard, but you can assist him or her such that you can say, look, this is what's going on at Tier 1. You know this. You know, you're really far away from Tier 1, but you got to let them do their own scorecard. How does the performance of a board of directors impact on the performance of the organization and its ability to achieve its strategic objectives? Very good question, Bonita. So you got a power board, and you got a set of objectives or directors on that board, and you've got a set of executives that pretty much have to deal with the board. Now, what I would recommend you do is when you build your scorecard for the corporation or the organization, nonprofit or government agency, you involve those directors in the process. In fact, every organization that we've worked with that's been nonprofit, it could actually be even for-profit, especially if they're publicly traded and the board of directors is in place, you should involve them in the process of building the Tier 1 scorecard. Engagement. Get them to buy into what you're doing is what you're looking for. How do you implement the strategy profile in local government where there are multiple business functions? Excellent question, Ashley. Remember, on the slide that you see up now, that strategy profile comes from those elements before it in order. Well, guess what? Those are the same elements that are used for nonprofit, government, and for-profit. You are identifying all of those attributes in those prior segments above strategy profile. It's just a different set of stakeholders. Your community is probably your outcome, and most definitely is your outcome on your scorecard. At your highest perspective, it's the community. Second to below that is your financial. And then the internal process and organizational capacity. They are in the same alignment regardless of how your business is organized. For-profit, nonprofit, or government. Let's see. 3 more. Why isn't the CCO working with the CEO and SMO at row 1? CCO, Chief Communications, I'm going to presume that's Chief Communications Officer. Could be. I don't deny that that could be the case. In this chart, I wanted to make sure that that communications team is in place to build a plan. In your organization, it might be appropriate to have them row 1, row 2, row 3. Definitely. What do you mean by BSC visual? That is, going back to what I said, this is a balanced scorecard. Right after we talked about the 9 steps and what a balanced scorecard is, Sam, that is the visual. We have a full size, you put the vision statement, the mission statement, you put the description of the strategic themes and what those results are, you put the strategy map, and you put all of the things like the objectives, the performance measures, the targets, and the initiatives on there. All right, so once the VSME is established, and who updates it annually, how feedback is given through the strategic owners in leadership. VSME, let's see, that's got to be vision, strategy, measures, and execution, I would presume. And if this is at the corporate level, I'm relatively sure they're going to have owners assigned to all the various elements under each of those horizontal categories, VSME or VSEM. And I happen to know that I think I know where this is being implemented. You're going to get that cascaded down to some department, and they're going to have owners assigned to them as well. What is the difference between initiatives and projects? Technically, nothing. They're all projects. Initiatives have project management 101 requirement. In fact, in organizations that I've worked with, when they wanted to really do initiatives and projects well, Microsoft Project, got to have it, or something derivative that you've used to manage that. Because when you go and see what we do with the Balanced Scorecard software, we have a whole section in there called Strategic Initiatives. And what do you see? Start date, end date, milestones, budget expended, budget remaining. Are you in trouble or are you on time? And it comes down to on time, on budget, you're golden. Either one of those two is off whack or off the rails, you're not golden. It comes down to that, just project management 101. All right, let's take a look at this. I've showed you this, and you guys have studied that. Great questions, because I could tell you're reading these. This happens to be the result of an evaluation meeting. They actually had changes, not massive changes, but the yellow change, some changes for their business and support processes. They definitely were going to change their communications plan because they had drivers of their enablers and pains and their actual customer need and valuation or their customer value proposition changed. That also drove a change in their strategy profile, which in turn drove a change in their initiatives and commentary, and slight modification to one or two objectives and the commentary off of their Tier 1 scorecard. And eventually then they need to line those changes through the various departments that those objectives cascade or align down to. All right, so reassessment of the M&M environment. Once again, not the candies that you see advertised on TV. It's macro and micro environments. What's the first trap? Not doing the planning and not executing it. What's the second trap that I've seen most prevalent? They don't want to allocate sufficient time. This is not a process that you can hurry. You really have to study it. You have to make some decisions about it. Because remember what I said earlier about if you miss something in that macro environment, maybe if you miss something in that micro environment at the annual planning cycle, and because you hurried through the process, there's a good chance you'll get blindsided by it sometime in the next 12 months. And everybody will say, oh, yeah, we thought about that, but we didn't act on it. Well, maybe because you didn't take sufficient amount of time. And by the way, if at a Tier 1 level, entire leadership management, all the strategic objective owners at all organization levels, this is the Tier 1 scorecard. This is the big kahuna of scorecards for the organization. All of the departments, especially if you've already cascaded or aligned down to 2 and 3, they should be involved. Definitely 2 and above should be involved in that meeting of this review. Let's talk a moment about the communications plan. I'll come back to your questions. Candace is feverishly typing here, keeping up with your questions. I want to talk about this communications plan. I'm not going to go through this in great detail, but the reason I'm giving you this example, and by the way, there's the green reference at the bottom again. If you want the rest of the rows that were on this plan that I couldn't get on this PowerPoint chart, fill out that contact information and just write the word plans in the message box. Well, first of all, you got to create a survey. Believe it or not, I've got some clients where surveys are taboo. Well, if surveys are not going to be done because senior management doesn't want it to be done, that's where you do a sampling. You get your department managers to go out and do it one-on-one. And you're going to see a slide in a minute that talks about being one-on-one. Next thing is you got to update the scorecard posters, or Sam, you asked about what the visual was. You update those and you get them posted around. A very, very inexpensive way to communicate on a daily basis what the Tier 1 objective is for the organization, and if you wanted to create one for the department, you also put that right next to it so they can see where the linkages are from Tier 1 to Tier 2, what they strongly support. Create some triangle desktop pieces, you got accordion folds, create a newsletter, doesn't have to be anything overly complex, and you do this on a regular basis. And I've put some recommendations on owners up there. By the way, there's 2 other columns that are not on this chart. Standard Project Management 101. What's the target completion date, and what was the actual completion date? Here's one that I can't tell you. I've seen executives, I've seen department managers, they just freeze up when you say to them, I want you to conduct a two-way dialogue with small groups or one-on-one. This is the best. That's why I say this is communication at its purest sense. As you start to go down, reverse order, the arrowheads, believe me, the messaging starts getting lost. It gets interpreted differently. The other thing, too, at the Tier 1 level, senior leaders that just say to their directors at the senior level, say, okay, here's what we want you to report. Flirting with major misinterpretation of the message that needs to be sent down to departments and teams and individuals. And by the way, I'm not a fan of social media to project your strategy statement to the organization. This has got to be very formal. So formal, we provide you with this template that basically says who's the target audience, what's the desired behavior you're expecting to change from their perspective. Oh, by the way, communications and department manager, where do you think the resistance issues are going to be and what are they? But here's the one. When you're putting a scorecard together, I don't care if it's a Tier 1, I don't care if it's a Tier 2, you need to put yourself in the shoes of the people that are going to be listening to this and viewing it. You better be able to explain what's in it for me. I'm now just the guy who stamps out bolts and nuts every day on the assembly line. And I'm seeing MBA speak descriptions and objective labels that don't have any connection to me. You have to understand what's in it for the person that's viewing it. What are the key messages? What medium will you use and when, frequency, and who's going to deliver the message? So think about this. You can make this form up yourself. And when you do this, the first time through, yes, it's homework and it's hard work and it's heads down work. The next time you do it, you can judge how well your messaging was received and make some modifications. If you don't believe me on the communications aspect, there's no way you can turn a blind eye to John Cotter. These 2 of 8 reason change initiatives fail come right to the crux of communications, and I box the one that's probably powerful. I already talked about the one about 10 or 1,000 or 100 or 1,000. Every possible form and media to carry your strategic message to the employees. You know, if all organizations were the military, where rank and file, command and control rules, you don't do what you're told, you get thrown in the brig, well, that'd be great in organizations, but that's not going to work. You have to get your message to your organization. You have to bring them on board. You have to get them to buy in. You have to get them to understand what's in it for them. In regards to communications programs, not even doing the 2 things that I showed earlier, the 3 templates, is trap number 1. Again, not allocating sufficient time. And at this case, not involving the entire leadership, management, strategic objective owner teams at all levels, and blatantly not seeking communication team or individual assistance. Why is that standing out as a sentence by itself? Because some of your organizations are engineers or departments are engineers and technical guys. Having come up through the engineering ranks of IBM and also the engineering ranks of the college, engineers have a real problem about communicating. You got to seek assistance. Some managers are not good at communicating. You got to get the communications team. Somebody might say, well, Joe, we don't have a communications team. Well, I'll bet you have a marketing department, and they're tasked with doing a lot of messaging. Ask them, and that'll start you in the right direction. All right, let's take a couple questions here. Whoa, you guys are really on a roll here. Okay, strategy profile must come from customers' evaluation, right? No. as you look at the chart back before in the components, the strategy profile is determined from all the elements above that. If you want to bring in the results of some customer profiling or customer surveys, you can do that, but I would stick with the elements that were on that components chart. What do you recommend for situations in which the results of an initiative are largely qualitative, but leadership wants to measure it quantitatively? The quantitative measures are superficial and really don't speak to the value of the initiatives. Carmen, I would recommend that you get a balance. Try to get a balance of qualitative and quantitative. The other thing I would recommend you do on qualitative is get yourself fixed up with some kind of qualitative, usually our interviews, videotape sessions, written statements that come in. Get yourself fixed up with some textual analysis software. I recently did this for a client. They had no values, and I had to put them through an exercise to determine their values. And again, they didn't take sufficient time. I had documentation, without even diving into it, said that there were at least 15 values. They only wrote 3. And I had to send back to them and say, I just did the textual analysis on this, and these terms, which are values, are shown here multiple times. Do you guys want to reconsider this? And they went back and looked at the data, and they said yes. So you can turn a qualitative into a quantitative if you just think about how to do it. What do you mean by business and support processes at the top of slide 18? Okay, good question, Douglas. You would not believe how many times you walk into an organization, especially at the tier 2 level, and you got the department manager, and he brings in about 4 or 5 of his top team leaders, top go-getters, think out of the box kind of guys. And they start sitting around, and the first question I ask them is, okay, let's start documenting every business process that Department X does, and we start itemizing those out. Invariably, if it's a large enough department, somebody will say, I didn't know we did that. And it turns out that that is a highly customer-centric process that 1 or 2 people in that team didn't even know that they did. So you have to get this stuff documented, because if something changes, like that components chart with the red and yellow for that client, well, that changes things, because that might drive a change to the strategy profile, might drive a change to the objectives, etc. How do you include the board of directors, especially non-executive directors, in your balanced scorecard? Just engage them in the build, Maria, from the start. You got to reach out to them and say, we're going to do this. We need your input. We need your time. Pretty standard fare for most nonprofit organizations. The board's highly involved. How do you handle a situation where the shareholder has a command and control, ad hoc and static mentality, and continuously goes against the organization's long-term efforts towards becoming a continuous improvement organization? Decano. That's what I call, when all else fails, position power and rank or command and control is going to win out, and especially at the executive level. Because invariably what's going to happen is your team's going to go out and build a scorecard, and you're going to go through the process of creating strategic themes, and from those themes you're going to get the final set of strategic objectives, and you're going to bring them into the executive team, and the chief leader or the chief executive is going to nod his head, and then all of a sudden he's going to stop and say, you know what, I don't see this strategic objective on there. I want that on there. That's position power. You can't get around that. But there are logical things you can do to help guide them to maybe a decision that makes logical sense for the scorecard. How can we assure that the KPIs are appropriate? Very good question, Zafar. First of all, hopefully some of your performance measures are already in place and you're collecting them somehow and you're tracking them. For those that don't, you may have to set something up and then monitor them more frequently. Maybe your data collection is going to ramp up and your reporting frequency is going to ramp up, and you watch the needle to see if they're giving you the results that you want. If you're in an industry that's highly researched and reported about through professional organizations, you could also do some benchmarking against reports that come out like that to help you get to the right performance measures. What's your experience using Hoshin, Kari, Hoshin Planning to communicate and deploy? Do you recommend it? Ivan, I fundamentally do not ever say any other methodologies can't work, especially when it comes to communications and deployment. Where I am kind of adamant is that you follow our process to get to your strategy map. If you want to bring something in that's a little different on the communication side and it works in your organization, by all means. The one thing I'm trying to impress upon you here in this presentation today is don't forget to do the communications. If it makes sense to do Hoshin, Kari, fine, you can do it. Our initiatives always strategic. If not, what's the difference? Initiatives on a strategy map need to link to each strategic objective. Think about that ellipsis. Improve customer satisfaction. There are two streams of influence on that strategic objective. The performance measure, targets, and thresholds that you said you were going to use to measure if you're improving customer satisfaction or not. And then you were going to define and identify and define some strategic initiative, a second stream, against that strategic objective that will help improve customer satisfaction. So what are some potential initiatives? Well, you're gonna do a survey. Everybody does some kind of survey on customers. You're going to deploy people from the sales department to go out and meet face to face and collect qualitative and quantitative information. There are any number. Now, if you're going to do something like, oh, I'm going to redesign the customer order page, that is operational. That doesn't really have that much effect on the overall strategy. So you have to be very careful about getting the right altitude on these initiatives for strategic or operational. All right, what do you mean by, okay, Ibrahim, we did that one, business support processes, that's what the departments do, that's what the organization does. Would you suggest the guidelines specify the amount of time items on the scorecard can be changed, 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 times a year? Ashley, you need to look at your own organization culture. If your organization is like ones I mentioned earlier, tech, who are a highly volatile environment, you may have to do this more often. You may have to have a more heads down, deep dive evaluation on a more regular basis than every 12 months. Okay. Wow, we're cruising here now. That's good. Good questions, by the way. But I'm gonna take the rest of the time to go through these next set of slides. Are a little shorter here. So let's talk about aligning your organization. By now, you should have painted the mental picture of what I have up there on the screen. We've got the Tier 1 objectives, the corporate-wide chart. We cascade or align those objectives down to Tier 2. First question I always get is, do I have to bring every objective down to Tier 2? No. You're going to see in a minute. The question you have to ask when you're doing the alignment process to a Tier 2 is, what strategic objectives on the corporate chart do we strongly influence? And that's the key word. Do you have influence over it? So if the corporate chart has something like improve customer satisfaction, and you're sitting in a minute you'll see it, the gas department of a utility, of course you have influence over that. You just got to do it better for your particular department, which is improve gas customers' satisfaction. And then eventually you're going to cascade those objectives at Tier 2 down to individual goals for the teams and individuals. Really now at the Tier 2 level, Tier 3 level, it comes down to, what do I need to do to help my department resolve one of its or two of its strategic objectives properly? And by the way, I've actually seen clients and organizations where they said, we want this at the Tier 3 level, teams and individuals, to be all about performing on the initiatives. Remember I said earlier there are organizations that really admittedly say they're poor about project execution and completion. Those organizations have said to the teams and individuals, your goals are just get the project done on time, make sure the deliverables are 100%, and make sure the budget's on budget. So those change depending on organization, but mostly they are objectives on their goal sheets, skill improvements, assistance, that type of thing. This is the chart that it's all about. How do we achieve our vision? That's what the corporate scorecard was all about. Remember that slide earlier that talked about, showed all the elements on a scorecard? It's all about cascading or aligning that strategy down. So how does my business unit contribute to the overall strategy? And then the employee says, how do I contribute to the department strategy? And if everybody performs at 100%, end game, corporate strategy is resolved. Now, if you take a look at the bottom, you'll see that this moves now from a strategic direction to a tactical. Remember I said earlier, some organizations want those tier 3s to be working just on the initiatives of the projects, get the projects done on time, on budget, and with good deliverables. That's tactical. And then we move in that direction. This gets down to day-to-day work that needs to be done. So here's an example. I need to improve ease of customer access. Tier 1. Whatever caused them to create this objective, that's what they've got. The next thing that comes down during the alignment process is this says, okay, fine, I can improve my department's ability to assist the customer's access. Oh, by the way, they've identified some performance measures along the way. And they've said to the individual employees, you got to go out and ramp up your customer service skills. And they've said, fine, we'll do a service skill exam, we'll test you going in, we'll test you going out, do a little observation out in the field, see if you've improved or not. Okay? Now, here's the steps. And in light of the time, I'm not going to go through this in detail, but when you look at the alignment from tier 1 to 2, it looks almost exactly like the same process you used off that component chart with the red and yellow component boxes that you use for tier 1, except tier 2s cannot fool around with a vision. Vision is the purview of the organization. Tier 2 mission might change because every department's different. And the other thing you don't see on there are strategic themes. Those were set by the top level chart, and those are the themes that need to be in place 100% of the time, 24/7 by 365. And so those two things stay golden, and the departments, they modify, they create their own elements. Okay? Now, what about tier 2 to 3? Well, I put 2 box streams in here because a lot of organizations run by teams now. The one thing I would say is if your organization is prevalent of having teams formed for short periods of time, maybe even long periods of time, but mainly the short periods of time, I'm going to have Jim, Jane, Jerry, and Joe on a team for 6 months. Oh, by the way, they're on loan to somebody else, and when they come back, they're going to go back to being individual contributors to my department. Well, how are you going to evaluate them? So the reason I've got this team box in here is that you have to start taking into account some type of contribution that they're making within the team to see if it's successful. And I would advocate, there's some organizations that do this very well. There are other organizations that just say, no, we don't take that into consideration at the annual performance review. Why? Was the team's project successful? Well, they always are. Hard to believe that. Were the products, the deliverables, 100%? Well, some of the times they were. Something was wrong on the team. So that team should be evaluated as well. And then you bring a team score over to the individual score, and that's what gets sent up through HR for the evaluation. These are pretty straightforward things here on teams and then individuals. Okay? You'll be able to study this during the replay when we get the link done. What are the traps on this one? Well, our standard one about not allocating sufficient time. Not completing the Tier 1 scorecard. We've actually had some clients say, we haven't barely wrapped up Tier 1, and they want to move right off into Tier 2. Hold it. We got to get that Tier 1 system up and running. We got to make sure the performance measures are calibrated properly. We got to get some initiatives underway. Let's take a breather, and before we go down into Tier 2. Plus, you got to go through your communications program for Tier 1, so everybody in the departments knows that this stuff is coming. Okay. Don't, if you want to put yourself in a trap, don't allocate enough time. And don't involve the entire departmental leaders or leadership guys in this process, because you will definitely tip over in this cascading or alignment process. Same thing, you got to create a communications plan for tiers 2 and 3. There's an interesting one in the lower left cell. I knew about this only because of my generation in my first job. You ask people about managing by wandering around. They're fresh out of college into some management spaces now in departments. They'll look at you like, what do you mean by managing by wandering around? Well, you got to look it up, and you can do it by looking at a place called mindtools.com, and that's great that they've captured this. And this actually builds a lot of accountability if you manage by wandering around. Again, you can request a full copy of this plan. Don't design the plan again and don't complete it. Don't allow sufficient time, and make sure if you don't involve everyone at the tier 2 and 3 level, you're really starting to put yourself in jeopardy for a complete buy-in or an answer to the question, what's in it for me? Last but not least, let's take a look at some live stuff here. By the way, Candace has captured all of your questions, and we'll be sending those out. Anybody that put questions in, send a contact, and we'll send the whole anybody that fills out a contact request for not only the plans, will also get the answers to these questions that we can't get time to here today. You guys have been really good about the questions, by the way. Now, I'm going to show you these slides, but I'm going to jump out of this and go into the live stuff, okay? Because I want to show you the same thing about monitoring. The key thing is about monitoring is it solves quite a few different things. First of all, the minute you go to a performance analysis system, I don't care what system it is. The one thing that I've discovered with most clients is there's no place to hide within the organization anymore, because most of the software performance analysis systems allow readers galore at no charge. Everybody, they want to be a viewer. Of course, viewers can be categorized by security levels. You don't want them looking at financial things and that type of thing. But in the case, here's Mayberry Utilities, one of our case studies in our class. Put it in quick score. But the thing is, I want to show you some things in there that allow you to start reporting to the exec level or anyone else that is in there in the organization that has a need to know. So let's look at the Tier 1 scorecard. This is all Tier 1 scorecards. Remember we talked about the need to track those initiatives? Well, when you get all those initiatives identified and spec'd up, you can put them in the system. And remember I said key things were start and end date, due date, completion date. The only thing we didn't put here was owners, because I didn't want to make up a whole bunch of names back at this point. Was it achieved? Can write some notes, can send some emails about it. But take a look at this one about employee engagement. I mean, that talks to the communications program. There are related items. You can relate all of these tasks or these initiatives to other objectives and other artifacts within the system. So this can give you a good indication of what's happening with regards to your initiatives in the system. Here's one that most executives, senior leaders love. I don't care what's going on in the organization strategy-wise. I only want to see the ones that are red. So this is a red report. And so now I can click on this and say, well, why is this revenue per customer a problem? And I can go right down to it and say, well, here's the history on this thing. Wow, that thing is buried in red. And here and I can start to look at the history. You know, was yellow, then green for a quarter, then yellow, then green for 3. Now I've got 3/4 of at least red, and I can change the slider if I want to go back farther, and the system will put up new information for me. So that's one way to look at it. You know, you can also get these targets. You can see if these are the targets that were set. You can see which ones are on target, off target, etc. But let's go back to the main card a minute, and let's take a look at another element for you especially in the nonprofit and government world, you might want to set up briefing books. You don't want them looking at everything, but you want to set up a book that they say, this is the stuff I need. Notice this is categorized by senior leadership and management. So we got a little bit of demarcation here. So let's take a look at the senior leadership. What do they want to see? Well, I really like the graphic. I want to see what's going on with Mayberry, what's going on with our company. And you can see the ellipses are giving us some early flags. And you can see the arrows. And it says, okay, so the last reporting period on improved customer value was yellow, and it's trending downward based on all the data that we captured for a period of time. What about this improved and expand value-added services? It's trending. It's going to stay neutral, but it's red. I can go right from there as an executive and see what's going on with this guy. And how many services do we add? Well, part of the problem is we probably didn't add enough services. Let's see what's going on out here. And sure enough, 2 quarters in a row, that's the reason it's probably red. There's even a third one over there. Those zeros, the thresholds were set at certain levels. This might be one that you have to watch. Let's go back here. Let's go to, I want to go back to those briefing books a minute. And we see here, we got the red performance report. Then this particular leadership wanted to see workforce effectiveness index. What's going on with that? Well, apparently, however they designed the initiatives around that and related, here's how they did the index calculation in QuickScore. They took a look at career plan completion, organizational culture score, and number of training days. They created the index out of that. And they're doing pretty good. I mean, their last 5 quarters were pretty much on track. So for that time, at this moment in time, senior leadership probably is pretty happy about what's going on. Now let's take a look at what the managers are doing. Next thing we got is, here's an excellent one. Here's another one managers and leaders like. Just give me the glimpse of the scorecard from the perspectives. And this happens to be a nonprofit government organization because the utility organizations are normally nonprofit government. So customer, the outcome, satisfying the customer is the most important thing. Financial is utilization, budget utilization, budget mobilization, internal processes, everything we do with the employees and organizational capacity. And, you might say based on this statistics, they've got some problems. I mean, organizational capacity seems to be doing okay. They're probably ranking down a little bit in financial, so you might want to take a look at what's going on with financial. They got the red performance report again, and they've also got this one because we just saw in a minute ago, that this one was showing some trending in the wrong direction. So we've got things like the performance measures of days receivable, non-sales revenue, costs, and revenue. Now, I want to go back to something here in just a second. And I think I already showed you this, but I want you to take a look at it again. And let's take a look here. And we got something on strategic initiatives. And we had this employee engagement survey one. This happens to be the Gantt chart. But let's go down to the tasks. And we got a whole series of tasks, at least have been identified here. It comes from link to 3 others. This seems to be pretty much on track. This is where you might start understanding the pulse concept, and maybe you want to ramp this up to something a little more frequent. This is typically an annual process. Might want to start thinking up some statistically leveled confidence numbers that says, oh, I only got to go out and talk to 30 people, and I can probably get a statistical mean that says that's pretty close to what the rank and file say on pulsing. All right, let's go back here. I've left you these, some samples here. You guys have got a great number of questions. What do you think? How many questions you got up there, Candace? Let's take a look. Got a fair number. I'll answer those questions, fill out that contact message form. We'll go there. last bit of promotion. If you want all the answers in book form, you can get the Institute Ways book. Everything you've just seen is in the book. And you can also get Kindle versions as well, so you can get it at Amazon if you don't like the hardbound anymore. And the last thing before we leave is I'd like to thank you. And now you just need to go for it and go out and follow the steps. I really appreciate your attention. I really appreciate your questions. And I think the link will be up probably within about 2 or 3 days. I have to do one more of these sessions like super early in the morning, but that's by plan. And so we'll deal with getting the link to you based on your registration as soon as we can. I want to really thank you for your time. I really want to thank you for your questions. And you guys have a great remainder of the week. Thank you for listening.